Welcome back, future CMAs, to another explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into CMA Part 1, Section B. Now, if you've been grinding through the material, you already know this section is, well, it's dense. We're talking corporate strategic planning, budgeting concepts, forecasting techniques, and the whole master budget process. But don't worry, we're going to translate all that heavy textbook theory into a totally practical, logical roadmap. Let's get right to it.
To kick us off, I really want to anchor this entire explainer with a brilliant analogy straight from the text. Think about Section A of your exam. That was all about financial statements, right? The rear view mirror. It tells you exactly what already happened. But Section B, this is your GPS. It's your map. It's all about putting on your strategist hat and predicting what we actually want to happen. We're shifting our mindset from looking backward to calculating the road ahead.
And here is our itinerary for the trip. We have 5 major pit stops today: the big picture of strategic planning, budgeting basics and behaviors, forecasting the unknown future, building the master budget, and finally, pro forma and financing.
All right, pit stop number 1, the big picture, strategic planning.
So before a company can sit down and crunch the numbers for next month, they have to zoom way, way out. We're talking about the long-term, 5-year macro vision of the business. I mean, every successful journey starts with a destination, right? There are 5 logical steps to this, basically a recipe for setting that ultimate destination. First, you define your mission, your vision, and your goals. Why do you exist? Then, you analyze the external environment using tools like PEST and Porter's 5 Forces to see what you're actually up against out there. Step 3, you look in the mirror. You analyze your internal environment, your SWOT, to find your true strengths and weaknesses. Once you know the landscape, Step 4 is formulating your actual strategy. And Step 5 is getting out there and implementing it. It's a super logical progression.
Now, let's clear up a classic exam concept that honestly trips up so many people: efficiency versus effectiveness. Listen, a truly great strategic plan absolutely requires both. Efficiency is all about doing things right, minimizing your inputs, like time or materials, to get a specific output. Effectiveness, on the other hand, is about doing the right things to actually hit your ultimate goal. Let's put it this way. Passing your CMA exam with the exact minimum passing score. That's effective because, hey, you passed. And it's efficient because you didn't overstudy. Scoring 100%, sure, it's effective, but it is definitely not efficient.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, budgeting basics and behaviors.
So now we've got to turn that massive 5-year strategic vision into a 1-year mathematical action plan. We are officially entering the world of budgeting. And the first big question is, who actually puts this thing together? On one hand, you've got participative budgeting. This is a bottom-up approach where your lower-level managers actually build their own budgets. It's incredibly accurate because, well, they know the day-to-day details, and it really builds commitment. But it takes forever. On the flip side, authoritative budgeting is completely top-down. Senior management just dictates the numbers, boom. It's incredibly fast and aligns perfectly with the big strategic goals. But man, it seriously risks destroying employee morale because the lower-level managers feel like they have zero ownership.
And that brings us to a really crucial point. Human behavior heavily impacts accounting. If a company goes with participatory budgeting, they face a huge risk known as budgetary slack. Basically, this is the practice of padding the budget. You know, a manager might purposefully underestimate their revenues or overestimate their costs just to make their targets super easy to beat. And yeah, while that might guarantee them a nice year-end bonus, it severely damages the company's overall goal congruence. It hides the true profit potential and just leads to a totally inefficient allocation of resources.
Section 3. Forecasting the unknown future.
So we've looked at the human element, but to actually build a solid budget, we've got to predict the future using objective statistics and data, not just gut feelings. And to wake you up a bit, I've got a wildly surprising question straight from our source text. Does eating ice cream cause shark attacks? Seriously, think about it for a second. If you plot ice cream sales and shark attacks on a graph, they actually both spike at the exact same time of year. So, does that mean one causes the other?
Of course not. But this highlights literally the most common pitfall in regression analysis. Correlation does not imply causation. There's a third, hidden variable here: summer temperatures. The heat actually causes both people to buy more ice cream and to go swimming in the ocean where the sharks are hanging out. When you're using multiple regression to plot trend lines and forecast your sales, you always have to look out for those hidden variables so you don't draw totally bogus conclusions. Another absolutely vital forecasting technique is the cumulative average time learning curve model. This breaks down exactly how repetitive labor gets mathematically faster as production ramps up.
Take a look at this example. We're using an 80% learning curve. The very first unit takes 10 hours to make. But notice what happens every single time the cumulative production doubles. When we go from 1 unit to 2 units, the average time drops to 80% of the original, so down to 8 hours. When we double again, from 2 to 4 units, it drops another 80%, hitting 6.4 hours. It's an incredibly powerful way to objectively forecast your labor costs, especially when you're launching a brand new product.
All right, Section 4, Building the Master Budget.
Okay, we have our forecasts. Now it's time to assemble the pieces. But before we trigger this big logical domino effect, we have to pick our methodology. The two big ones are incremental and zero-based budgeting. Incremental budgeting is what most companies out there do. They just take last year's budget, add maybe 3% for inflation, and call it a day. It's super simple, but it totally perpetuates past inefficiencies. Contrast that with zero-based budgeting, or ZBB. With this, you start from absolute zero every single period. Managers are literally forced to justify every single expense from the ground up, completely wiping out historical waste. It's brilliant for cutting costs, even if it is incredibly time-consuming to actually pull off.
Now let's talk about the strict sequential chain reaction of creating the master budget. You absolutely must follow this order. Step 1 is always the sales budget. I mean, you simply can't pack your bags until you know exactly where you're going, right? Once you figure out how many units you're going to sell, step 2 is the production budget, to figure out how many you actually need to make. That then tells you your direct materials, labor, and overhead needs in step 3, which naturally flows right into your cost of goods sold in step 4. And eventually all of this culminates in step 5.
And step 5 is arguably the absolute most important survival tool a company has, the cash budget. This is the absolute heart of liquidity planning. It tracks every single expected cash inflow and outflow. And what's really crucial to grasp here is the why. Look, a company can be wildly profitable on paper, they can have a gorgeous income statement, and still go completely bankrupt if they run out of actual, literal cash to pay their bills. The cash budget prevents that whole disaster by highlighting those shortfalls way before they actually happen.
Finally, Section 5, Pro Forma and Financing.
So, we've built the master budget. That's our official operating plan. But remember, that budget is static. It is one very specific set of numbers. But management, they constantly need to explore alternative strategies. And that is exactly where pro forma statements come into play. Pro forma literally translates to as if. And these are strictly what-if scenarios. Like, what if we raise prices by 10%? Or, what if we expand into Europe? Pro forma statements let executives model all these potential changes internally without ever altering the official static master budget.
Now, if one of those what-if scenarios involves some massive growth, you need to figure out exactly how to fund it using the Forecasted Financial Statement Method, or FFS. It's a pretty straightforward step-by-step process. First, you forecast your total sales growth. Then you calculate the new assets you will require to actually support those sales. Next, you subtract the spontaneous liabilities that naturally just rise along with your sales, think accounts payable, and you subtract the retained earnings you plan to keep. Whatever's left over, that's the plug. And that plug is your additional funds needed, or AFN. It tells you exactly how much external financing, whether that's bank loans or issuing new stock, your planned growth is going to require.
All right, we've analyzed the environment, we've forecasted the future, built the master budget, and secured our financing. Your GPS is officially set and your gas tank is calculated. But I want to leave you with one final memorable challenge. What exactly is your contingency plan if the road washes out? Because the absolute best strategic planners know that no forecast is ever perfect. Having alternative plans ready to go for unexpected detours is exactly what separates decent managers from world-class CMAs. So are you prepared for the unexpected? Keep that in the back of your mind as you continue studying, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.